I've been thinking a lot about this, the impact of trauma on a person's spiritual path. And in my own personal life, I know I've experienced a lot of resistance to belief in God and to having a relationship with a higher power. I was raised in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Shout out to anybody who is SDA or used to be. It's an interesting experience being raised in a church like that, based on a literal interpretation of the Bible. Some of the main tenets of the faith are a belief in hell, a belief that Jesus is going to return and bring salvation at some point, and a belief in the apocalypse, that the world will come to an end and it's going to be chaotic and hectic, and there's going to be an end times, and there's going to be all these signs, and then Jesus is going to come back and take some people away physically, bring some people who were dead back to life. Other people will perish in hell forever. It is a descendant of, or one of the many, religions that sprung out of the movement that was started by Martin Luther, I think in the 1800s. Martin Luther and others decided to kind of break away from the Catholic Church, which had in Europe and in the United States, the Catholic Church was like the main, faith. And then there were all of these what we now call Protestant religions that developed during this time of Martin Luther. A lot of different little bubbles of faith that have popped up, or that popped up during this time. A lot of people were predicting the end of the world, selling all their things and forsaking this world, and thinking that they were going to transition into something new, and then being, confronted by the reality that everything around them was the same. So that time period and that chaos was the birthplace of Seventh-day Adventism. Without going into too many more details about that specific religion, you can do your own research about that. My experience led to a lot of trauma and complications with my ability to connect with God in a very deep and personal way. It's taken me a while to get to a point where I feel comfortable to just say that. My whole family has kind of been a part of this church, and my whole upbringing is connected to this specific religion and these teachings being the truth. And I was taught that we had the truth, we were the God's true people, and it was our job to make sure that other people learned about this truth. The end of the world could happen at any moment, at any point during my lifetime. These are the things that I was taught. But here's where it gets problematic. A lot of people come away from religion and become separated from religion because of specific teachings that come from people, right? Other human beings that don't come from a place of love. They don't come from a place of true divine inspiration. They come from a place of toxic power dynamics, and people trying to control other people. A lot of religions, people use them to justify certain teachings and certain beliefs. The history of some of these religions, including Christianity and Islam, they have been used by governing entities for the intention of controlling the people and manipulating them to do specific things. We as human beings are very innately spiritual, so it also makes sense that we would be susceptible to manipulation using a spiritual system. Be the type of manipulation that could be prolonged, across generations, because you're messing with somebody's connection to their own spiritual identity, their own higher self, collective self, the God self. True spirituality is a very personal experience. People will even tell you that you're supposed to have a personal relationship with God, but it's hard to cultivate that because these religions, like the one that I was raised in, so much of the focus is on do these things, right? When I was growing up in the communities I was raised in, a lot of the focus was on making sure that you're going to church on Saturday, making sure that you're eating a vegetarian diet, not eating meat, or especially not eating certain types of meat, making sure that you're not drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes. There might be a good reason for the rule, but when you get a community of people so focused on all of these rules that they become put the police for each other, and it becomes this thing where you're in a church community and people are pointing the finger at each other behind their back, or even to their face, like, well, maybe if you didn't do X, Y, and Z, you would be right with God. Even in the sermons that I would hear, it's like condemn, 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 shame, shame, shame. When you're so focused on who's good and who's bad based on these really superficial actions, you take away the opportunity for someone to discover the truth in what you're saying. And you shut yourself off from the potentiality that what is true for one person may not be true for another person. Even in the Bible, the story of Jonah, right, who gets, called upon by God to go deliver this message to this specific city, and he's like, fuck that shit. And God is like, okay, well, your life is going to be hell essentially until you do this thing that I want you to do. And he ends up swallowed by some giant fish. Like, his whole story is fucking ridiculous, because he's essentially just like, I know God wants me to do this thing, but I don't want to do it, and I'm going to go do this other thing. And everything in the universe conspires against him. Really, everything in the universe conspires in his favor in terms of guiding him in the direction that God wants him to go into anyways. It's just this whole story, read it. That message that God told Jonah to deliver to that city, he didn't give it to everybody. He didn't choose just anybody to do it. If Jonah had been like, hey, my cousin Steve, really likes delivering messages, maybe he could do it instead. That's not going to work, right? This one message was for Jonah to deliver. That was his purpose. Other people had other messages. Other people had other purposes. Who are you and who are any of us to look at another person and say, well, because God told me that I shouldn't be drinking caffeine, that I shouldn't be drinking coffee, none of you should be drinking coffee. And I'm using that example because that's one of the tenets in my religion. Now that I've done some research and I've been into health and things, I could see why maybe there are benefits to not drinking coffee. But I also know it doesn't affect everybody's body exactly the same way. There are trends, right? But everybody's going to be a little bit different. And so there are people for whom caffeine doesn't really have a big effect, and they might be able to drink a cup of coffee every day. They might be able to drink 6 cups of coffee and not feel any adverse effects. Meanwhile, somebody else, they're drinking 1 cup of coffee and having a very negative experience or negative consequence. And theoretically, if God made both of these people, God might be telling this person to stay away from coffee because something about their biology just doesn't align with coffee. Meanwhile, God didn't give that message to this other person because it doesn't matter. And there are people on this planet for whom their dream is to roast coffee and sell coffee. So somebody's got to drink it, right? Like, I don't see the value in thinking that one person's one way is the ultimate way when we are all so different and so unique by creation. It just doesn't make sense to limit everybody to the same rule book. With that said, I think you need a rule book when people experience this traumatic effects of being in super strict, super judgmental religious systems. It gets to the point where they abandon it all. There's a piece of being human that I think religion feeds or cares for. Whether or not you believe in God, that there is something fundamentally human about believing in a higher power and having a spiritual practice. And there's a lot of research to suggest that people who have a spiritual practice benefit from it in an emotional and psychological way. And there are, of course, health benefits that go along with a positive mental and emotional outlook on life. And when you just don't have that, there are issues. There's confusion. There's feelings of loss. There's feelings of purposelessness and listlessness. And in my personal life, I've experienced issues of disempowerment, feelings of apathy, feelings of depression during a time in my life when I was really, really struggling with these emotions. I experienced self-harm and I contemplated ending myself. I published a book about this experience because over the last decade of my life, I've been uncovering, revealing, and healing all these different parts of myself that I realized were really damaged by the belief system. Not to throw blame or shame at any of the people in my life who loved me, who really believed this stuff and believed that it would help me. I've had a lot of increased anxiety in my young adult life and in my childhood. Like, I used to have random ass, super intense daydreams about the most horrendous things, like somebody getting into a car crash or the world coming to an end. And I was a very anxious and kind of depressed child, and that, you know, followed me into my young adulthood. And I'm just now getting to a point where I feel like I've actually found tools to help me not only heal from some of that stuff from my childhood, but also, you know, better handle the stuff that I'm dealing with in my day-to-day life now. You know what didn't help me with any of that? My religion. And I don't think that's because there isn't some underlying truth that could be extracted to help me through my life and to actually benefit me. And I do believe that I have benefited from a lot of the teachings that I got from that religion. So I can't say that it's all bad. I think my respect for the earth and my respect for my physical body, these are things that come from my religion. The universe guru, Mina Irfan, in one of her videos recently was talking about how she believes that everybody needs a religion, and that people are feeling lost and confused these days because they don't have religion. And I just feel like, on the one hand, I think she has a point, because a lot of people do feel lost and confused without religion in their lives, especially people who had it at one point and then lost it, like I did. I kind of crafted my own religion, right? It's like a custom religion that I have for myself that I don't really preach to other people because I don't feel like it's for other people. It's my version. It's for me, right? There are spiritual traditions where it's kind of a given that this is the way that it's going to be. You know, like, here's the kit and DIY your own version. There's this understanding that it can be adapted, it can evolve. Everybody's going to have their own unique spin on it. And so I feel like the problem comes in when you have a system like the one that I'm familiar with, where the foundation is built with an intention of control. If it was rooted in political power from the beginning, and it was created and adapted over the years to help maintain the rule of a specific political entity, those systems have a lot of toxicity, because there's this history of abuse. It's this imbalanced power dynamic that's just baked into it. And that makes it hard, in my opinion, to see the truth and let go of the bad stuff. How do we heal? If you're like me, how do you heal the trauma and heal from the abuse that you endured as a result of being a part of these spiritual traditions, and then still find a way to be open to truth? We have to find a healthy and balanced way to explore this part of us that wants to believe in something bigger than ourselves, and ask questions and get to know that part of us, and get to know the world, and get to know our spiritual selves. I do think that we as human beings need that spiritual peace in our lives, and religion may be the way for some people, but there are a lot of issues with religions, especially the systems that exist today. A lot of the religious institutions that exist today are full of corruption, and many of them are based on principles of control and manipulation. I think we need reformation. I think we need people to have these conversations, and I would love to know what you think. Do people need religion? Do you need to have a spiritual connection or a belief in God to be happy or healthy as a human being? Leave your thoughts below in the comments, and until next time.